as we appear to be getting closer and closer to actual negotiations between President Trump and Vladimir Putin over the Russia-Ukraine war and trying to bring that to an end. Everybody else is trying to get their 2 cents in there and trying to figure out what's going to happen and where their piece of the pie is. And unfortunately, there's a lots of different pies that seem to be coming into play that might not have been self-evident earlier on. And one of those is going to be some of the natural resources for Ukraine and how that figures in to any kind of end of war negotiations. First of all, we'll start off with the fact that we have to try and unpack a lot of this stuff today. Doug McGregor, CEO of Our Country, Our Choice, highly decorated combat veteran and expert on these kinds of matters in Russia, Ukraine. Doug, welcome back to the show.
Sure. Good to be here.
Well, listen, we got a lot to get to, so I want to jump right into it. Yesterday, Trump was being asked about how the negotiations were going and when is he going to talk to Putin and, and how all that's going. And he kind of had dropped for some, a bit of a bombshell that he's looking for payouts for the United States, not just to hand out to the Ukraine side.
One of the problems we have with the Russia-Ukraine situation is that we want to see some equalization because we're in for close to $300 billion, and they're in for $200 billion less. Why are they in for less? Because Biden never asked them for money. He never said, you got to pay. He never did. All he did is hand out money. So we're talking with them right now, and we're actually working some deals right now. So we have some guarantees and some other things to keep that whole situation really going. Going. We're telling Ukraine they have very valuable rare earth. We want what we put up to go in terms of a guarantee. We want a guarantee. We're handing them money hand over fist. We're giving them equipment. European is not keeping up with us. They should equalize. And look, we have an ocean in between. They don't. It's more important for them than it is for us. But they're way below us in terms of money. And they should be paying at least equal. They should really be paying much more than us, but let's say equal to us. And they're billions and billions of dollars below. So we're looking to do a deal with Ukraine where they're going to secure what we're giving them with their rare earth and other things.
Now, that was really interesting because this is literally the first time that Trump has even mentioned anything about basically getting paid from Ukraine, but it's not the first time the issue was raised. Here is a confidant of Trump's from back in November.
Ukraine is still standing. This war is about money. People don't talk much about it. So it's in our interest to make sure that Russia doesn't take over the place. We can make money and have an economic relationship with Ukraine that'd be very beneficial to us with peace. So Donald Trump's going to do a deal to get our money back, to enrich ourselves with rare earth minerals.
Yeah, enrich ourselves. But Doug, as we were talking a little bit before we came on the air, they might want to slow down a little bit on this idea about getting rich, about Ukraine and rare earths.
Well, Dan, setting aside for a moment the callous disregard for human life, which is evident in the comments made by the president and, as you say, his sidekick, Lindsey Graham. What we've got right now is a situation in which 1.2 to 1.5 million Ukrainian lives have been lost and destroyed. That doesn't seem to figure prominently in anybody's calculus. The notion that from the beginning this was about money excuse me, is interesting, but not really that plausible. If we go back and look at it, the business was always about harming Russia, which of course backfired badly. The only thing we've harmed is ourselves, and of course fatally harmed Ukraine. But we need to understand what President Trump, I think, is referring to: rare earths. Rare earths, of course, are these groups of minerals that are very rare, difficult to find. If you find them and you mine them, they then have to be refined. So you may mine tons and tons of rare earths and end up with perhaps 50 or 60 pounds of material you can actually use. This material goes into microcircuitry, microchips, a lot of our more sophisticated weapon systems. Most of that, in fact, virtually all of it right now, about $7.8 trillion worth of it, sits in the region of eastern Ukraine that is populated with Russians. The Russians already control it. So you can write off the rare earths that are there right now, unless you want to do business with President Putin. And that's an entirely different question. On the other hand, the remaining wealth of Ukraine is largely agricultural. That is in the West, and the Ukrainians still control that, except in reality, they don't, because Cargill, DuPont, and Monsanto have apparently bought up the rights for something in the neighborhood of 80 to 90% of the agricultural land in Western Ukraine. So I don't know what President Trump is expecting to get. I would remind everybody of his claim when he ran for office in 2016 that he would inevitably make the Mexican government, quote unquote, pay for the wall that he was going to build. Well, we never got the wall. And if anybody thinks the Mexican government is even remotely relevant, is crazy. Maybe he could have gone to the drug cartels, but there's no money going for that. I don't expect anything to be harvested right now from this war except more dead and more permanently injured human beings. You know, finally, let's keep something else in mind, which is depressing. He's continuing to behave as though Russia is this existential threat to us, our enemy. It isn't. Now, he knew that 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know what's changed, but it appears that he signed on for the CIA MI6 theme, which is that Russia is the enemy and has to be treated as such and viewed as such. We put all of this together, it's very hard for me to imagine a set of circumstances under which he could meet with President Putin that would be favorable to any sort of arrangement strategically between ourselves and Russia.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to touch on a little bit about how some of the where some of the impetus for that thought from Trump may be coming from about the existential threat that Russia poses, because there's definitely some key people in the West that think that. But really, to underscore even what's possible for negotiated settlement, before I even get to that, we have to look at Volodymyr Zelensky, because he has been outspoken in wanting to have a negotiated end that's favorable to Kyiv. And now then he's saying here, and I'm specifically asking you this question because of you've written a number of books on how to create military forces and how long it takes, etc. He's going to say here that he wants to reform and reorganize his armed forces right now at the near 3-year mark going forward, and it's going to have a good outcome. Watch this.
Щоб в цьому році були успішними в перемовинах, українські воїни мають бути стійкими на передовій та результативними у знищенні російських окупантів. Також головком доповів, що до модернізації нашої армії вже був затверджений відповідний план щодо переходу на нову організаційну структуру Збройних сил України та створення корпусів. Зберігаємо увагу до цього, до виконання. Корпусна система потрібна. Ми обговорили сьогодні підходи до призначення командирів корпусів. Це мають бути найбільш підготовлені, найбільш перспективні офіцери з бойовим досвідом і сучасним мисленням. Армія повинна бути сучасною.
So I'm not sure if you could read all that, but basically he's saying that the Ukraine forces need to stabilize the front line and continue to fight to hold Russia back. Meanwhile, behind the lines, the Ukraine army is going to be reformed into a corps structure, which is similar to the U.S. World War II version that we had before there. And he's going to modernize it. And it's going to be, well, really great. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the man's smoking something. It has no chance whatsoever of success. Right now, President Trump is allowing $1 billion worth of equipment and munitions to go to Ukraine that were initially destined for Ukraine under Biden. The problem is, who's going to use the equipment? Where is the manpower? The Ukrainians are effectively running out of Ukrainian men to fight, and they're dragging people in that are underage or of a very advanced age, and in some cases women. And of course, they're simply being shoved into the slaughterhouse, which is effectively what Eastern Ukraine has become for the Ukrainian people. It's just nonsense. Forget it. It's not going to work. It takes on average 10 years from start to finish to take a military establishment, particularly a ground military establishment, and fundamentally change it. When you talk about navies, it's even longer because they're very, very dependent on the most recent technology that can frequently render them obsolete overnight. So I just think it's nonsense, but it's probably part of the larger money laundering scheme. People are proselytizing for this man and for what's happening there because it's a money-making machine. And we've talked about that before. We can talk about more of that now in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, in fact, speaking of the money, that's also been in the news a lot lately, that Zelensky is claiming that $100 billion has just vanished into thin air. Here's how he put it.
Я коли чую, і раніше чув, і сьогодні ми чуємо від Сполучених Штатів Америки, що Америка дала Україні сотні мільярдів, 177, якщо сказати більш точно. Така звучала точна цифра, яку підтримували або голосував Конгрес, тощо різні організації. Дивіться, я як президент воюючої країни вам говорю, ми отримали більше 75. Тобто 100 мільярдів з цих 177 або 200, говорять навіть деякі люди, ми ніколи не отримували. І це важливо. Бо ми говоримо про конкретні речі, бо ми отримали це не грошима, а зброєю. Ми зброю отримали на 70 з чимось мільярдів. Є навчання, тренування, є додатковий транспорт, є не тільки ціну на зброю, були гуманітарні програми, соціальні тощо. Але коли говорять, що Україна під час війни отримала 200 мільярдів на підтримку армії тощо, це неправда. Я не знаю, де всі ці гроші.
Yeah, again, I don't know if you could read that on the bottom of the screen there, but he said, Trump mentioned $200 billion that had been given. He said, but we've only gotten about half of that. And so I don't know where this other $100 billion is. And part of it may just be he doesn't understand where it's going. I'll always remember very, very vividly and angrily during the time when in late 2023, early 24, when the U.S. was, the Biden administration was trying to get the Congress to pass a $61 billion aid package for Ukraine. You had Mitch McConnell go on the Senate floor and enthusiastically say, hey, we need this passed, but most of this money is going to stay in the good old US of A and create American jobs and create stuff for the US. So it's not all going to him. And then now here we have this where he claims he doesn't know where it's at. What do you make of that?
Well, even the most expert liar has to mix lies with truth, and he's done so in that statement. I can't tell you whether or not it's 100 billion that has been siphoned off and returned to the United States through the money laundering machine to the pockets of defense consultants, defense contractors, people on the Hill, various other individuals in industry. I mean, who knows? That could easily be the case. But I do know that he's been paying himself roughly $11 million a month. And the man owns millions, I could be tens of millions, maybe 100 million in real estate, homes and places in Europe and the United States. So this is a crook on the scale of Al Capone, who's killed more people than Al Capone ever imagined killing, and is even more shameless than Al Capone was with regard to contempt for the law and contempt for the truth. And we continue to feed him cash. The real question is, President Trump, what are you doing? This man is a total liar. You're never going to see that cash again. You're never going to see most of the equipment turn into anything of any real use. So why not stop it? Cut your losses and get out. I don't understand why he refuses to do that.
Yeah, and I don't either. I don't know. Maybe because people are talking in his ear. Maybe Lindsey Graham and is convincing him. Who knows what he's getting right now in the intelligence briefings? What his aides are saying. I don't have any idea who those people even are on the inner circle. But this does seem to be a change in what Trump has previously said. So obviously somebody's got his ear and talking to him about some of these things. But I'm interested because I've heard these comments about Zelensky having villas and all this other kind of stuff in the past. Obviously, they deny them or so. Do you have any sources that can validate that? Because on the one hand, it seems probable that they are, but I've been unable to validate it.
Oh no, his wealth has been inventoried. I can send you material on that and articles that have been written about it. Now, if you choose not to believe it because CNN didn't say it, there's nothing I can do to help you. Because remember, an awful lot of truth never finds its way into the mainstream media. Have you heard anybody stand up lately on CNN or MSNBC or Fox and tell the truth about Ukraine? The real truth? No. They keep bringing on the same people who've been lying through their teeth for months. So I'm not sure you're going to find it there. I can send it to you. You know, this leads me to the other thing that you and I were discussing earlier. Benjamin Fulford, who is an interesting man, an astute analyst, put together a list of the senators that have received enormous amounts of money from the Ukrainian state, ostensibly through Zelensky. Now, this list was compiled after Zelensky spoke on the equivalent of YouTube in Ukraine and Russia and enumerated who these senators were and the various amounts. Now, we're going to go back and try to dig it out and find multiple sources to confirm it. But I think when Americans finally see this list, they're going to be in a state of shock. You're going to see some people that you would have expected to see, but you're also going to see a lot of people you never expected to see. And we're not talking about modest amounts. We're talking anywhere from $18 million to $65 million being returned through the system to these people sitting in the United States Senate. It's incredible. So I think we really need to look into this. I think President Trump ought to look into it because he has to deal with these people. They're supposed to be responsive to him as the leader of the government, the head of state. What's he dealing with? It looks like large numbers of them have no loyalty whatsoever to the American national interest, but they're certainly loyal to their own wealth.
Well, I agree that needs to be researched and investigated to the full and put out in public if any of that is all even close to being true, because then that just deepens the issue that you raised at the very top of the show here, that it's just this callous disregard for life. And we've often kind of speculated on here and been frustrated about what in the world are these people doing, trying to expand and keep this war on life support, which can't possibly go anywhere and a positive outcome for either the Ukrainian people or the West, and yet it continues to. And if this stuff turns out to be true, then there's going to need to be some accounting of that, I think.
Well, Dan, imagine how the Russian leadership feels when you have someone like Lindsey Graham, who I guess regards himself as some future or current warrior, which is absurd. He was an attorney on active duty, I guess, as a reservist. He even claimed to have served in the same unit with Tulsi Gabbard. I don't know. I haven't had a chance to ask Tulsi about that. But the bottom line is, when you're dealing with people like that who celebrate the loss of Russian life and insist that every Russian that's killed in this war by these Ukrainians is somehow or another a good thing. It's not, by the way. How would you respond to that as a Russian leader? I mean, that's like saying every time an American is killed in Vietnam or in Iraq or somewhere else, Russia benefits. We've never heard that from the Russians because they don't benefit from it. We don't benefit from the loss of Russian life. We don't benefit from the loss of Ukrainian life. This has all got to stop. We have to regain some sense of humanity, for God's sakes, and put aside all this other nonsense. And by the way, we have rare earths in the United States and Canada, North America. We can mine them. We can refine them. We have been lazy and we haven't done it. We need to get back into the business, and we need to build refineries, which are very expensive, but absolutely necessary. And it's going to be essential now because we're going to be more isolated than ever in the world from everyone who's fed up with us.
Right. We've already been curtailed from some that are coming out of China already. And now then we've just physically lost access to even potentially mine the stuff in Russia, as you also talked, or in Ukraine, as you talked about, because Russia now has moved in militarily to those areas. But if we're hoping that anything comes to an end, that we get some sanity, we're not going to get any from the NATO senior leaders, because we had Mark Rutte yesterday has this really strange view on things. He's going to talk about this threat from Russia and how it's already expanding into the Western Europe for no good reason, apparently.
Russian destabilization campaigns in allied countries are on the rise. They have targeted digital infrastructure, British officials, and even your National Health Service. Just last month, once again, you detected a Russian spy ship in British waters. And you made it clear to Moscow that such brazen acts were simply unacceptable. To stop these attacks once and for all, we need to up our game and make sure our deterrence leaves no room for doubt. We can do this by investing even more in defense. To put it in another way, to prevent war, we must spend more.
So there it seems to come back to money again. We're not talking about keeping safe. We're talking about this alleged Russian threat, which I'm sure some of this sabotage in the West is probably legit, but there is a reason for it.
Well, look, let's understand something. Rutte is part of that ruling political class in Europe and the United States that has risen up over the last 30 plus years. They are the successors to the original post-war elite in Europe and the United States. They have built this globalist structure for self-enrichment, and they have adopted an ideology that is effectively designed to destroy the peoples, the nations, the cultures, the languages in which they live. All of these individuals, Rutte is no exception, have a vested interest in sustaining the big lie that Russia is a threat. If he stands up and says, by the way, everyone who's preceded me in this office has lied to you, he's afraid of the chaos that will result. But we should reassess this and understand he's finished. He's out. Macron, Schultz, Starmer, all of these people are out. They've mismanaged finance. They've mismanaged immigration. They've mismanaged everything and committed terrible, terrible acts of self-sabotage against their people. They're all going to be flushed out. It's only a matter of time. It's not a matter of if, it's now a matter of when. And he's just a puppet. He's handed, just as Stoltenberg was handed a little script and said, read this at the press conference, and he reads it. And who writes the script? People in Washington. They write the script. And he says what they tell him to say. This is not going to last much longer. It is just deeply, deeply disturbing that President Trump hasn't broken this code.
Well, now, in fact, I want to ask you about that, because if it was scripted by somebody in Washington, it would seem that it wasn't Trump that was scripting it, because what he's saying right now, even in the context of wanting the rare earth minerals, it's in the context of saying, I'm trying to find a negotiated settlement to end this war. He has in recent days said, this is a ridiculous war. We want to get it over with, etc. But then you also, in that same conference yesterday, Keir Starmer added this strange thing for 2025.
We are all working to end this war. But let's be absolutely clear. Peace will come through strength. And we must do all that we can to support Ukraine's defence. And that means stabilising the front line, providing the kit and training that they need. And that's why this year the UK will give more military support to Ukraine than ever before.
So why are you going to give more support than ever before when you know that we're in the end game and Trump wants to have this wrapped up in 100 days? There's not going to be any more going on there. And yet he seems to be at a very, dissonance with what Trump is saying.
Starmer is living in a fantasy world. That money from Britain will never be forthcoming. Britain is on the verge of economic or financial collapse. Britain, like the United States, is a country in which the financial system owns the economy. It's not the way it should be, which is an economy with a financial system. Everything is being financialized in the United States and Britain. They're up against it. They don't have the gold on hand to back what they're doing. There's a real sense of panic in the city of London right now and the banks there, because they don't have the gold to back anything. And when everything falls apart, you have nothing left, everyone turns to gold. The stupid statement made by Bernanke many years ago when he was asked by Ron Paul, why do banks still maintain gold on hand? He said, well, I guess it's a tradition. What a deceitful, lying statement. It's absurd. It's because gold is real. It's worth something. Britain doesn't have it. Now there's talks about us shipping assets into their pool of assets to back them up. If we do that, we're foolish, because they're going to go down anyway, and it will not redound to our advantage in the future. What I'm trying to say is this is all nuts. It makes no sense. It's all going to come crashing down in the months ahead. The future is not going to look like the past. We don't have the wherewithal. We don't have the wealth. We don't have the strength to do what these people are outlining. And by the way, there's no reason why we should, as we were talking earlier.
Well, now, so let me ask you, where do you think this is going to go? Let's look at the other half of this equation. You have all of the Western leaders on one side, to include Zelensky, and then you have Vladimir Putin on the other side. So, as he is unequivocally in the military superiority, and by the way, it looks like that when you look at there was an analysis out recently done by a Western analyst that says that basically what he has seen is that Russia has been building up with their military industrial base and their growing manpower pool, additional formations like large scale formations that have not yet been brought into combat, and at some point could come smashing into the lines. That hasn't happened yet. You and I've been talking. We thought that might have happened even a year ago, but it hasn't yet. It seems like the capacity genuinely is there. What do you think that the risk is that Putin says to Trump when they ever do talk, okay, here's my terms, or I'm going to unleash more force in here? How's that going to work out?
Well, keep in mind what I just described happening in Britain is going to follow here. We're going to follow suit. We're headed into a very serious financial crisis, but it's going to strike Britain first and very hard. I suspect it will have a powerful impact on the continent with France and Germany and Italy. The point is, I don't think he has to do much, Dan. Everything's falling apart in the West. The banking system is not credible. The economies are fragile because we don't build anything that people want to buy. We've lost touch with reality. We are living in a fantasy world that is financed with a level of confidence that is undeserved. And ultimately, it's when confidence collapses that you get the bank runs and the panic sets in. Those things are coming, first in Britain. So I don't think President Putin has to do a great deal. Now, if he decides it's time to wrap this up and be done with it, I suppose he could do that at any given point in time. By the way, I know you've been watching what's happened in Kursk Oblast, where the Ukrainians sent in a force which was partially Ukrainian and also partially international, and they committed terrible atrocities up there, killing large numbers of Russian civilians. The Russians have shown it on television. Basements full of bodies, buildings full of bodies, just wantonly murdering people. That is going to stop. And the Russians have now committed Chechen forces to go in there. And I can tell you, they're going to go in and there will be no prisoners. They will root out these people and destroy them. So it's a matter of how far do we push the Russians, and when do they finally pull the string and say enough's enough and lose patience? Thus far, thankfully for us, Putin has exercised enormous patience. He needs to, because things are moving tragically away from us and in his favor.
Now, before we shift gears here, I'm going to ask you some stuff about our border here in just a second on the last amount of time we have. But what is your estimate of what is going to happen? Because right now, all American cameras are on Trump every day, and he keeps talking, and General Kellogg keeps going on TV talking about how great of a deal maker he is, and Russia's going to have to give up something, and Ukraine's going to have to give up something. Like there's some grand bargain here. But if Trump what's going to happen? A better question: when Trump starts this, the cameras are on him, and Putin's not willing to any kind of grand bargain other than just here's my minimum lines. How's that going to work out?
Well, first of all, I don't think there will be any meeting until President Trump has a reasonable expectation of success. And that means that he's going to have to accept reality. In other words, he can't dictate to the Russians. That's an impossibility. The biggest problem we have right now with the Trump administration is that they are living in the distant past. They think we are the center of the universe. They think that our economy, our marketplace is indispensable. It isn't. We have $1 trillion deficit, trade deficit. China has $1 trillion surplus. Think about it. We're going to tariff China. China is not going to suffer. China will move in new directions. It's got far, far more people to turn to for business in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America than it ever had before. So I don't think a lot of the things that President Trump is talking about are really going to work. I hope that when he figures that out, that he'll take a different approach, but he may not. What he may choose to do, which other presidents have occasionally done, you just stop talking about it. You realize that there's no chance for success, so change the subject, go somewhere else.
Well, in fact, one of those other subjects could be the U.S. border. We'll look at that next because there's been a lot in the news here recently where Trump was going to levy 25% tariffs on Mexico. They ended up saying no. Okay, fine. We'll do what you want with the border. We'll move 10,000 Mexican troops up to the border here. But then that puts on the northern part of the border, and the border czar Tom Homan talked about how we're going to move some troops. In fact, we already have moved a small number of U.S. Active troops. I think it's 1,500 so far to the border. And he was warning people that, hey, we're going to secure the border, but it's going to be bloody.
Once we secure the border and make it more difficult for them to make money, it's going to become violent. You're going to see violence on the border, and it's unfortunate, but we know it's coming. Border Patrol is prepared. It's great to have the military on the southern border. They're prepared. It'd be a bad move on their part to harm any Border Patrol agent or soldier, because I think President Trump will reply with great force, and I think he has the capability of wiping these cartels off the face of the earth if they harm our soldiers or Border Patrol agents. So, word of advice, I wouldn't go there.
So that's something that's not talked about very much in the United States and not on many people's radars. Can you talk to us about what Homan's talking about there and what is the risk of bloodshed, especially could there be a war against the Mexican cartels?
We are already at war with the drug cartels in Mexico and Central America. Let's be frank, that's not news. We are already at war. They have been at war with us for decades. It has simply reached a fever pitch now. I like Tom Homan, and I wish him all the success in the world, but I am very, very skeptical of what I see happening because I haven't seen a decisive move to do the things that need to be done. We've talked about this before. First and foremost, you must take control of the border with the U.S. Army. Certainly augment it with Marine Corps ground forces, but you've got to do that. And a military commander must be in charge because we are at war. That's number one. Everyone in that operation should report to him, whoever he turns out to be, whoever is ultimately selected. And I'm talking about anywhere from 40, 50, 60,000 troops, depending upon the composition of the force. There has to be a systematic surveillance regime set up that looks hundreds of miles into Mexico, that is downlinked in real terms to forces on the ground. And you have to set up a barrier system. You know, all of these things have to be done systematically and thoroughly. It's what we need to do. I don't see that happening. I see incremental contributions here or there. Well, we'll put something here, we'll do this. And now threatening the cartels, the cartels are not interested. They don't care. They have almost an inexhaustible number of people that they can throw at us in all sorts of ways. They have a lot of money. They have access to some of the best military technology in the world. We'll probably end up having things like javelins shot at us before long. And we always knew that once you close that border seriously and stopped the massive flow of drugs into the United States, that you would end up having a war inside our country because the drug cartels have penetrated the entire country. They reach into all the big cities and now into rural areas. They're going to have to be rooted out. And this is going to overlap with the removal of illegal aliens, people that have no business being in the country. And I think as you saw recently in LA, and probably we'll see it soon in New York and other places, the usual suspects on the left are going to encourage these people to resist. And we can't be bothered with this. We cannot tolerate it. This is the breakdown of law and order that threatens the very existence of our civilization and society. We have to take decisive action. Now, I've said from the beginning, and I mean this sincerely, President Trump needs to do these things. But to do these things effectively, he needs to get the hell out of Eastern Europe immediately. Get those forces back to the United States. Bring back the forces from Korea. Bring back the forces from Okinawa. There's not going to be a war with China or Russia. He knows that. That's nonsense. Neither of them want a war with us. We don't want a war with them. He's making the right noises right now towards Iran. Perhaps he can head off that war. I'm not sure. It's a little late in the game now to stop the Israelis, particularly since he just announced another $1 billion of aid and equipment, virtually anything the Israelis want. And I'm sure that includes all of the munitions that they need to finish off Gaza and finish off the West Bank and potentially southern Lebanon and largely Syria. We'll have to see what happens, but you cannot do all of these things. You cannot conduct operations around the world militarily and then run the border as though it's an economy of force measure. That has to be the central focus. That's the front where we live or die as a nation.
And I wonder if you could go into a little bit of detail there, Doug, because a lot of people look at the border and they say, okay, there's some illegal immigrants coming across. We can stop that. But, you know, an actual threat to our national security, just, a lot of people don't see it. So I wonder if you can define what that threat is that is warranted with that much military power.
Well, we're already confronting the loss of 130, 120,000 American lives every year to this fentanyl madness. That doesn't include deaths from other drugs that come into the country. So that's one part. Secondly, the mass influx of illegals has cost us billions of dollars. It's bankrupted our health system. It's an imposition, a burden on the educational system, which is in ruins in the United States. So you look at those things and back down from that and just look at criminality in general. People will say, oh, well, these aliens have only committed crimes on the same level as Americans. That's not true. And that material needs to get to the American public. But we've had an FBI, a Justice Department, that has skillfully concealed the truth from the American people for years. That's got to stop. And that's where Kash Patel comes in. We've got to tell the truth. Who's committing the criminal acts? Who are they? Where are they from? That needs to be public. And when that picture is drawn accurately, people will see we are at war. You know, this is the same thing that you've got over in Europe in many cases, where great cities, Paris, London, Berlin, have so-called no-go areas. You can't go into them. If you go into them, you risk being killed. And those areas are populated with non-Europeans, people that have come into those countries as migrants, and now, of course, don't want to leave and go home. We're going to have a similar problem in the United States. They will not want to leave. But if we don't address this as ferociously as I'm outlining, we may not make it as a country. And President Trump should make that his top priority. That's what has to come before everything else. And then finally, we need to start looking at the criticality of integrated air defenses, not just for the whole country. That's an impossibility, but we've got to get down there on the border. You know, we're now under attack with these drones. Our border patrolmen are, the military will be. As we ramp up and it becomes obvious what's going to happen, don't worry, the cartels will unleash everything they've got against us. And they'll work very, very hard to buy as many politicians and as many local leaders and as many sheriffs as they can in an effort to defeat us. So this has got to be our main effort if we're going to survive.
And in fact, I guess kind of toward that end, Tom Homewood continued on in that same interview, outlined some things that he's thinking how maybe we can coordinate things from the southern side of the border with the Mexicans.
Do you trust the National Guard troops of Mexico that President Sheinbaum said she would put on the northern border?
Well, we'll see. I mean, under Trump's first administration, they put military on their northern and southern border, and it had a great effect. You know, for decades, I've said many in the military, Mexican military, many in Mexican law enforcement are corrupt. And a lot of it's not by choice. Either you do what the cartels tell you to do, or they'll kill you and your family. So with our military on the border, their military on the border, the cartel's going to be hurting, which means this. When we secure the border, less fentanyl overdose deaths in the United States, less sex trafficking of women and children, less known suspected terrorists coming across that southern border. So it's a game changer, and President Trump's moving at lightning speed.
And towards that end, he said he claims Trump's moving at lightning speed. You're suggesting that it's not 1,500, it's not going to even be a drop in the bucket, but you said 30, 40, 50,000. How would that change the military? I mean, we would probably have to build some kind of barracks or post along the southern border to house all these people, to keep them there that long, right?
Well, that's what we did for 100 years between 1846 and 1948. Go through Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and California, and look at all the places that are called Fort something. That's because those were army posts. That's where the cavalry regiments were quartered, and infantry regiments. After World War I, the main focus of the United States Army at the time was war in Mexico. And that was because we saw that the Mexicans eagerly adopted the Germans as allies during the war and allowed German influence to penetrate. We also saw subsequently that they sided with the communists, with the Soviet Union. We also saw that they provided training opportunities and support for Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. They're not our friends. Now, to answer the question that came up first, I'm surprised Tom Homan just didn't say no. We cannot trust the federal Mexican troops. Of course not. Absolutely not. We can't match the funds that they can receive from the cartels. The Mexican government is a joke. Forget it. Anything they say is ludicrous nonsense. The cartels are in charge. They are the enemy. They have the money. They run Mexico. We've got to get over this silly nonsense and understand what's real. Now, I'm not here condemning the Mexican population. The Mexican population wants to survive. It's adapting to survive. And the setups that the cartels offer to them are not all evil. You get free dental care if you're serving in a particular cartel in a particular area. All sorts of strange things like this. They're not going to come to your aid. They're not going to help us. We're not going to get any help out of Mexico whatsoever. That's why the border must be secured. It must be closed. I don't give a damn if everything coming out of Mexico is stopped permanently on the northern border, at least as long as until we decide to admit anything else. It's going to get bad, but we're already at war. If I were advising President Trump, I would urge him to think carefully about declaring war on the drug cartels in Mexico as a first step.
Well, that apparently is something that he is considering, and Tom Homan, as I understand, is an advocate of that. But that will require, as you said earlier, a lot of changes because we can't keep all these troops we have all abroad in all these places, dumb things like Syria, Somalia, and every other place, and do this as well. We just don't have the resources to do that. So there's going to have to be some changes there too. But
Dan, you and I served together in the past on the Czechoslovak and East German borders. We were in organizations, military establishments that knew how to secure borders, knew how to provide surveillance, knew how to provide rapid reaction forces. I don't know if all of that has been lost, but my point is beware of anyone in uniform who steps forward and says, this is bad. This will harm our readiness to fight. That's a lot of nonsense. If you wanted to look at something that harmed our readiness to fight, think back on the last 20 years of stupidity in the Middle East, the waste of human life, and the loss of over $14 trillion. That all needs to stop. That's why we need to get out. We need to get out of Syria. We need to get out of the whole damn place once and for all. We're not going to fix it. So let's not try and get out of Eastern Europe.
Yeah, the issue is just defend our country and our way of life. That's what we should do. Well, listen, Doug, we really appreciate this. Has been a pretty enlightening and lively engagement today, and stuff that I think, if you're right, it's going to start hitting the mainstream press at some point, whether anybody wants it to or not. So it's something that we have to address, and we appreciate you coming on and doing just that.
Right. Thanks very much, Dan.
All right. Thank you very much. And we also thank you guys for joining us today. As a reminder, we're on, we have podcasts as well. Larry Johnson's going to be here. Don't want to forget that. That's at 2 p.m. this afternoon. Larry's always got some great stuff to say with former CIA intel analyst. Also to remind you that we have a podcast as well. Some people can't watch on the video, but they love to listen. And so if you or your friends do podcasts, then by all means, let them know that Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, everywhere you get your podcast, just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive and you'll find us waiting there for you. In the meantime, thank you very much. Do like and subscribe on your way out if you haven't done that yet, so you can keep getting more good content like this, because we are unintimidated and uncompromised. We will bring you the truth that you need for your life, no matter what it is. Thank you very much. We'll see you this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.